What makes the U.S. Constitution so great is that it was designed to keep government small, to limit government authority. But the Constitution is failing that mission now more than ever. In 1992, the federal government was $1.3 trillion. Today, it is $3.8 trillion. It has grown threefold in under 20 years. Everything big government does that violates the Constitution owes its existence to high government spending. The lifeblood of big government is money, your money. Big government programs live and breathe on high government spending. But big government politicians and their mainstream media allies hate any talk about real government spending cuts. Big government politicians rely on donations and support from special interests who want the $3.8 trillion federal gravy train to keep flowing, who want the additional $3 trillion gravy train of state and local governments to keep flowing. They have a bag full of tricks they use on voters and taxpayers every day to keep government spending high. They'll get us talking about every issue under the sun except cutting government spending. They'll create controversies over areas of government that represent less than 5% of total spending, or less than 1% of total spending. Lately, they've been getting everyone fired up over funding of contraceptives, which represent less than 0.03% of federal government spending. Or they lure us into endless partisan bashing, and industry and political pundits get you hating the other side. Liberals bashing conservatives, conservatives bashing liberals. And while they're bashing each other's politicians and ideologies and legislation, Democrat and Republican politicians are all voting to increase government spending, with almost no exception. They are all voting to sustain high government spending and to keep it growing higher. Now these days, things have gotten so bad. Government spending has gotten so astronomical that it's finally getting more press. Spending cuts are finally being talked about. So now what do? How do they try to manipulate so that they can avoid actually cutting high government spending? One of their favorites is to talk about government functions rather than government waste. Government spending is marbled with waste. It's safe to say that any government budget at any level, anywhere in this country, can be safely and immediately cut by at least 10% by just eliminating the obvious waste. More than 90% of every government budget in this country can be safely and immediately cut by over 50% just by eliminating waste. The Democrat and Republican politicians deny that there is anything more than trivial amounts of waste within government departments and agencies and bureaucracies. They insist that the only way to cut government spending is to cut functions or services of government rather than the legions of waste within those functions. We must lay off teachers, they say, rather than stop allowing them to retire at age 54. So we don't need to hire more teachers to replace them. They say the post office is broke, so we have to close branches, or we have to cut Saturday delivery. But where is the discussion about waste within the postal system? Is that hard to find? Look at the insanely lucrative pensions they've been doling out for years, or the labor contracts that they use as an excuse to avoid firing employees who are dead weight. Instead of eliminating waste, they threaten to make you pay with fewer services. Another perennial favorite of those who protect and preserve high government spending is what we call the sky is falling. They threaten to cut the things that you care about most. Has anyone here had to cut their family budget or their business budget in the last 3 years? Anybody? Just a few of you. How did you handle it? Did you cut the things your family or your business needs the most? Or did you cut the things that you can do without? Did you force your kids to wear shoes that don't fit anymore first? Or did you scrap your plan to install a new in-ground swimming pool first? Which one is a higher priority? If you would rather force your kids to wear shoes that hurt their feet, claiming there's no money in the budget for clothes, while installing a new swimming pool in your backyard, then you would qualify to be a U.S. congressman or a legislator in your state government. Some of their tried and true favorites: police, fire, schools, and roads. But these functions actually account for a shockingly tiny portion of total government spending. In 2010, I headed a Massachusetts ballot initiative, as Jim mentioned, to roll back the state sales tax from 6.25% to 3%. Our big government opponents ran millions of dollars in ads to convince voters that cutting the sales tax would absolutely require us to cut back on police, fire protection, and schools. Their ads featured blaring fire trucks rushing to save burning houses. They blanketed the airwaves with thousands of these ads. Boston radio talk host Howard Carr joked that from watching these ads, he said, you'd swear there couldn't be a single building still standing in Massachusetts that hadn't burnt to the ground. But of the $54 billion in Massachusetts state government spending every year, how much of that goes to firefighting? About $100 million. Less than 0.2%. Most firefighting is funded by local governments and not affected at all by state spending, much less rolling back the sales tax from 6.25% to 3%. The advocates for big government were attempting to blackmail voters, deliberately putting the highest priority items, spending items on the chopping block instead of where they belong, at the bottom of the list, all while pretending that the things that should be cut don't exist. Things like special interest support, that marbled waste, failed government programs, redundant government programs, redundant bureaucracy and waste, unnecessary programs, and the programs that do more harm than good. The sky is falling, fear-mongering is perhaps the tactic used most by big government advocates to keep government spending high. If they did what was right, there would be no need to cut a single service that anyone is dependent on or that hurts ordinary workers and taxpayers. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't cut spending in just about every area of government, that we shouldn't eventually wean people off of welfare and subsidies. We absolutely should. But we should do so in the least painful way possible, not the most painful way possible, which is how big government politicians operate. While protecting and enriching their special interest pals, big government politicians propose spending cuts that hurt everyday taxpayers and workers who have no representation in the halls of Congress or in state capitals. They now propose to increase the retirement age for Social Security and to cut Medicare and Medicaid. We will have to cut back on these programs. But while these politicians threaten to cut them, they're doling out increases in the lucrative pensions for government workers and government contractors who are already overpaid, who are already getting benefits that dwarf those of private sector workers. They're proposing cuts in Social Security and Medicare while they're introducing new big government programs and hiring more unneeded government workers. Government largesse must be cut first. The paltry returns from Social Security and Medicare that taxpayers have been forced to pay for all